The apple hung just out of reach, red and perfect against the twilight sky of Prescott, Arizona, and 20-year-old Sarah Mitchell knew that stealing it might be the only thing standing between her family and another night of hunger. It was late September in 1883, and the drought had turned the small homestead her father once worked into cracked earth and broken dreams. Sarah's fingers trembled as she stretched toward the lowest branch of the orchard tree, her worn cotton dress catching on the wooden fence she had climbed. The O'Brien Ranch spread out before her like a kingdom of plenty, rows upon rows of apple trees heavy with fruit, while her own family's land lay barren and worthless 3 miles down the dusty road. Her father had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, leaving Sarah to care for her mother, whose grief had stolen her appetite and strength, and her 2 younger brothers, 10-year-old James and 8-year-old Thomas, whose hollow cheeks and tired eyes haunted Sarah's every waking moment. She had sold everything they could spare, the good dishes her grandmother brought from Philadelphia, her mother's wedding ring, the pocket watch her father carried through the war. Still, it was not enough. The general store extended credit until the owner's wife put her foot down, and the church had helped until too many other families fell on similarly hard times. Sarah had taken in mending and laundry, but work was scarce and payment often came in sympathy rather than coins. So here she stood, poised to become a thief, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The apple came free in her hand with a soft twist, and Sarah quickly dropped it into the flour sack she had brought. She reached for another, then another, working quickly in the fading light. Each piece of fruit felt like both salvation and damnation. She tried not to think about what would happen if she was caught, tried not to imagine the sheriff leading her away while her brothers watched with frightened eyes. 6 apples. 7. 8. Enough for a few days if she was careful, if she made them stretch. Those are some fine apples you are picking there. The voice came from directly behind her, deep and calm, and Sarah's heart stopped. She spun around so fast, she nearly fell from her perch on the fence, the flour sack clutching to her chest like a shield. A man stood there in the dusky light, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat tilted back to reveal a face that was young but weathered, probably no more than 24 or 25 years old. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim, and a shirt that had seen better days, and his eyes were the color of the summer sky Sarah remembered from before the drought, clear and blue and unsettlingly direct. Sarah started, but her voice failed her. There was no point in lying. The evidence hung heavy in her arms and shame burned through her chest like fire. Please, I know it is wrong. I know stealing is a sin, but my brothers have not had a proper meal in 3 days, and my mother, she barely eats anything at all anymore, and I just thought maybe a few apples would not be missed, and I am so sorry. I will put them back right now. Please do not fetch the sheriff. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, and to Sarah's horror, tears began streaming down her face. She had tried so hard to be strong, to be the pillar her family needed after her father's death, but standing here caught in her crime, all the fear and exhaustion and grief came pouring out. She swiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to salvage some dignity, but it was too late. The cowboy had already seen her break. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. Then he did something Sarah never expected. He smiled, just a small quirk at the corner of his mouth, but it was kind, not mocking. Well now, that is quite a problem. 8 apples for a family of 4 is not going to last very long, is it? Come down from there before you hurt yourself. Sarah hesitated, uncertain whether this was a trick, but the cowboy was already reaching up to help her down. His hands were strong and calloused as they steadied her, and he handled the flour sack with care, making sure none of the apples spilled. Up close, Sarah could see the details she had missed in her panic. The way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and something else, something clean and masculine that made her acutely aware that she probably smelled like lye soap and desperation. "I am Nathaniel Brennan," he said, as casually as if they had met at a church social instead of during a theft. "Most folks call me Nate. I work here at the O'Brien Ranch, have for about 2 years now." "And you are Sarah Mitchell," she replied automatically, then immediately wondered if giving her real name was foolish. But there was something about this man that made lying seem impossible, as if those blue eyes could see straight through to her soul. "Sarah Mitchell," Nate repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. "Mitchell, that would make you Dan Mitchell's daughter, would it not?" "I heard about his passing. I am truly sorry. Your father was a good man. He helped me find my way to the church when I first came to Prescott, did not know a soul in town, and he took the time to walk a stranger through the streets and make sure I found what I was looking for." Sarah felt fresh tears threatening. Everyone said her father was a good man, but kind words did not fill empty bellies or pay debts. "Thank you, that sounds like something he would do." Nate nodded slowly, then turned and started walking deeper into the orchard. "Come with me, Sarah Mitchell. We need to get you a proper basket. That flour sack is going to bruise the fruit." Sarah stood frozen, trying to make sense of his words. "I do not understand." He looked back over his shoulder, and this time his smile was wider, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Sarah's breath catch. "You came here to get food for your family. 8 apples is not going to do much good. We are going to fill a proper basket, and then I am going to walk you home and make sure you get there safe. These roads are not fit for a young woman alone after dark, and I would not be much of a gentleman if I let you struggle back on your own." "But I was stealing," Sarah protested, even as hope began to flutter in her chest like a bird testing new wings. "Why would you help me?" Nate paused, his expression growing serious. "My family lost everything in a fire when I was 15 years old. Our farm, our livestock, everything we owned turned to ash in a single night. We depended on the kindness of neighbors and strangers to survive that first year, and I swore to myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way we were helped, I would do it without hesitation. Besides, Mr. O'Brien is a fair man. He would not want anyone going hungry, especially not the family of Dan Mitchell. Now, are you going to come with me, or are we going to stand here arguing until full dark?" Sarah found herself following him, drawn by his confidence and the genuine compassion in his voice. They walked through the neat rows of trees, and Nate pointed out the best apples, the ones that would keep longest, showing her how to test for firmness and check for wormholes. He retrieved a large wicker basket from a small shed and began filling it with practiced efficiency, his hands quick and sure. The basket grew heavy with fruit, far more than Sarah had dared to take, enough to feed her family for more than a week if she was careful. "This is too much," Sarah whispered, watching the pile grow. "I cannot accept this much. What will Mr. O'Brien say?" "He will say that the Lord provides," Nate replied easily. "And he would be right. We have 3 full orchards, Sarah. This harvest has been the best we have seen in 5 years. A single basket of apples is not going to break the ranch, but it might just keep your family going until better times come." When the basket was full to the point of overflowing, Nate hoisted it easily onto his shoulder and gestured toward the main road. "Lead the way, Miss Mitchell." "I believe you said 3 miles down the road." The walk back to the Mitchell homestead should have been awkward, but somehow it was not. Nate talked easily, filling the silence with stories about life on the ranch, about the horses he worked with and the cattle drives he had been on. He spoke about growing up in Missouri, about his mother who still wrote him long letters filled with news of his younger sisters, about his dreams of one day having his own piece of land. Sarah found herself relaxing, even laughing at his descriptions of a particularly stubborn mare who had decided she would only respond to commands given in German for reasons no one could understand. "You speak German?" Sarah asked, surprised to find herself genuinely curious about this stranger's life. "Not a word," Nate admitted with a laugh. Had to get Johann, one of the ranch hands, to teach me the basic commands. Now I am probably the only cowboy in Arizona who tells horses to go and stop in German, and I have no idea what I am actually saying. For all I know, I could be telling that mare that she has beautiful eyes and I admire her hat. Sarah laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. The sound surprised her, and she quickly covered her mouth with her hand, as if joy was something inappropriate given her circumstances. But Nate just grinned at her, clearly pleased to have lifted her spirits even momentarily. "What about you?" he asked as they crested a small hill. "What did you do before times got hard? You mentioned taking in mending. Is that something you enjoy?" Sarah considered the question. "I suppose I never thought about whether I enjoy it or not. It is simply something I can do to earn money. Before my father died, I helped him with the homestead. We had a small garden, some chickens. I was teaching my brothers their letters and numbers. My mother is educated, came from back east, and she always said learning was important even for boys who might grow up to be farmers. I wanted to be a teacher once, but that seems like a dream from another lifetime now." "Why could you not still become a teacher?" Nate asked. Sarah gestured down at herself, at her patched dress and worn shoes, at the life that showed in every line of her tired face. "Teachers need education themselves. They need respectable clothes and proper references. They need to be above reproach. I am a thief, Mr. Brennan. As of tonight, I am someone who stole from her neighbors because she could not provide for her family through honest means. That is not the kind of person who teaches children." Nate stopped walking, setting the basket down carefully and turning to face her fully. The moon had risen, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow, and his face was earnest in the pale light. "You are not a thief, Sarah. You are a young woman who found herself in an impossible situation and did what she had to do to protect the people she loves. That does not make you a criminal, it makes you brave and resourceful and loyal. Those are exactly the qualities a good teacher should have." "You do not even know me," Sarah said quietly, but her heart was pounding at the intensity in his gaze. "No," Nate agreed, "but I would like to. If you would allow it, I would like to know you better, Sarah Mitchell." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah knew she should discourage this, should thank him politely for his help and send him on his way. She had no business entertaining romantic notions when her family was barely surviving, when every moment of her day was consumed with worry and work. But standing there in the moonlight with this kind, handsome cowboy who looked at her like she was something precious rather than pitiable, Sarah found herself nodding. "I would like that too," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. Nate's smile could have lit up the entire desert. He picked up the basket again, and they continued walking, but something had shifted between them. The air felt charged, full of the crackle of new connection, and Sarah found herself intensely aware of every detail. The way Nate's shoulder occasionally brushed against hers, the sound of his boots on the hard-packed earth, the way he kept glancing over at her as if to make sure she was really there. When they finally reached the Mitchell property, Sarah felt a wave of embarrassment at the state of the place. The house was small and in obvious disrepair, with missing shingles on the roof and a porch that sagged dangerously on one side. The yard was bare earth, the garden plot just dried stalks and withered vines. It stood in stark contrast to the prosperity of the O'Brien Ranch, a monument to failure and hard times. But if Nate noticed or cared, he gave no sign. He simply followed Sarah to the front door, waiting patiently while she tried to compose herself before facing her family. "The boys will be excited," she said, smoothing her hair back nervously. "They have not seen this much food in a long time. I need to warn you, they might be a bit overwhelming." "I have 3 younger sisters, remember?" Nate replied easily. "I am well versed in overwhelming." Sarah pushed open the door, and immediately 2 small bodies came hurtling toward her. James and Thomas were thin, their clothes hanging loose on frames that should have been sturdier, but their eyes were bright with the resilience of childhood. They grabbed onto Sarah's skirts, talking over each other in their excitement at her return. "Sarah, you have been gone so long we were worried," James said, his adult words at odds with his young face. "Mother said you went to find food," Thomas added, pressing close. "Did you? Are we going to eat tonight?" Then they noticed Nate standing in the doorway, and both boys fell silent, shrinking back against their sister with the wariness of children who had learned that strangers could mean trouble. "Boys, this is Mr. Brennan," Sarah said gently, placing a hand on each of their heads. "He was kind enough to help me tonight and to walk me home safely. Can you say thank you?" "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," the boys chorused obediently, their eyes fixed on the basket that still rested on Nate's shoulder. "You are very welcome, gentlemen," Nate replied solemnly, as if they were adults rather than children. "But I think the person who really deserves thanks is your sister. She walked a long way tonight to make sure you were taken care of. That takes courage." He set the basket down on the rough wooden table that dominated the small main room, and the boys gasped in unison. James reached out tentatively, as if afraid the apples might disappear if he touched them, while Thomas looked up at Sarah with something like awe. "Sarah, is all of this for us?" Thomas breathed. Before Sarah could answer, another voice came from the back room, thin and tired. "Children, what is happening out there?" Sarah's mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm evening. Margaret Mitchell had once been a beautiful woman, and traces of that beauty remained in her fine bone structure and intelligent eyes, but grief had carved her down to angles and shadows. She looked at the scene before her, her children, the stranger, the basket overflowing with fruit, and her hand came up to her throat in surprise. "Mother, this is Mr. Brennan," Sarah said quickly. "He works at the O'Brien Ranch. He helped me tonight." Margaret's eyes moved from the basket to her daughter's face, and Sarah saw understanding dawn there, along with a mix of relief and shame. Her mother was no fool. She could read the story written in Sarah's dusty dress and nervous energy, could guess at what desperate measures her daughter had attempted, and how this stranger had intervened. "Mr. Brennan," Margaret said, drawing herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. "It is kind of you to help my daughter. Please, will you not sit down? It is the least we can offer in thanks." "I would be honored, Mrs. Mitchell," Nate replied, removing his hat respectfully, "though I should not stay long. I have early duties tomorrow, and I would not want to impose on your evening." But somehow he did stay, settling onto one of the rough wooden chairs while Margaret insisted on cutting apples for everyone, her hands shaking slightly as she wielded the paring knife. The boys sat on either side of Nate, their earlier shyness forgotten as they peppered him with questions about life on a ranch. Did he ride horses every day? Had he ever fought Indians? Did he have a gun? Had he ever been in a shootout? Nate answered patiently, steering the conversation away from violence and toward the day-to-day realities of ranch work. He described teaching young horses to accept a saddle, the satisfaction of bringing in a healthy calf, the beauty of the desert at sunrise when the whole world seemed painted in gold and pink. The boys hung on his every word, and even Margaret seemed to relax slightly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips as she watched her sons animated and engaged in a way they had not been for months. Sarah sat slightly apart, watching the scene unfold with a strange ache in her chest. This was what their home had been like before her father died, filled with conversation and small moments of joy. Nate fit into the space so easily, as if he belonged there, and that realization was both wonderful and terrifying. She could not afford to grow attached to this kindness, could not let herself believe that this night was anything more than a singular moment of grace. When the last of the apple slices were gone, Nate rose to his feet, stretching slightly. "I should be getting back, Mrs. Mitchell. Boys, it has been a true pleasure meeting you. Will you come back?" Thomas asked immediately, looking up at the cowboy with open adoration. "Will you come back and tell us more stories?" Nate glanced at Sarah, a question in his eyes. She knew she should discourage it, should make a clean break now before her brothers got too attached, before she herself got too attached. But she found herself nodding slightly, giving him permission. "If your sister says it is all right, I would be happy to visit again," Nate said carefully. "Perhaps I could come by on Sunday after church. I would need to check with Mr. O'Brien, but I am usually free on Sunday afternoons." "Please, Sarah," James chimed in. "Please say yes." "You may come on Sunday," Sarah heard herself saying. "We would all be glad to see you again, Mr. Brennan." "Nate," he corrected gently. "Please call me Nate." Sarah walked him to the door, stepping out onto the sagging porch while her family remained inside. The night had grown cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and the sounds of the desert carried on the gentle breeze. Crickets and distant coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whole secret life that emerged when humans went to sleep. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for everything. For your kindness tonight, for not treating me like a criminal, for making my brothers smile. I will not forget it." Nate looked down at her, his face shadowed but his eyes bright even in the darkness. "Sarah, I meant what I said earlier. I would like to know you better. Tonight was not charity or pity. You are remarkable, and I find myself wanting to spend more time in your company." "Is that something you might want as well?" Sarah's throat felt tight. "I want that more than I should. But Nate, you need to understand my situation. I have responsibilities. My family depends on me entirely. I do not have the freedom that other young women might have to go on buggy rides or attend socials. Every moment of my day is spoken for, every bit of energy I have goes to keeping us alive. I cannot offer you much." "I am not asking for much," Nate replied. "I am asking for the chance to see you again, to talk with you, to perhaps make your burdens a bit lighter by sharing them. That is all. No expectations, no demands, just the opportunity to see where this connection might lead." "Then yes," Sarah said, allowing herself to smile. "I would like that very much." Nate reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. He lifted it gently and brushed his lips across her knuckles, a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and intimate. "Until Sunday then, Sarah Mitchell, sleep well." He was gone before she could respond, striding off into the darkness with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Sarah stood on the porch for a long moment, her hand pressed to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. She was terrified and excited in equal measure, caught between hope and the fear of hoping. When she went back inside, her mother was clearing the table, but she paused when Sarah entered. "That is a good man," Margaret said quietly. "I can see it in how he treats people, in how he spoke to your brothers. Your father would have liked him." "Mother, it is just one visit," Sarah protested weakly. "We should not read too much into a simple kindness." Margaret gave her daughter a look that was far too knowing. "Sarah, I may be grieving, but I am not blind. That young man looked at you like you hung the moon, and unless I am very much mistaken, you looked at him the same way. There is nothing simple about what I saw between you two tonight." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Is it wrong to feel something for him when we are in such dire circumstances? Should I not be focused entirely on the family?" Her mother crossed the small room and took Sarah's face in her hands, a gesture from Sarah's childhood that brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, my sweet girl, you have been so strong for us, so brave and selfless, but you are allowed to have something for yourself. You are allowed to feel joy and attraction and hope. Your father would want that for you. I want that for you. You cannot spend your whole life sacrificing every bit of happiness on the altar of duty." "I am scared," Sarah admitted. "What if I let myself care for him and something goes wrong? What if he realizes that I come with too much baggage, too many problems? What if he is just being kind and I am reading far too much into his attention?" "Those are all valid fears," Margaret acknowledged, "but they are not reasons to close your heart. Take it one day at a time, one visit at a time, see what develops naturally. And try, just try, to let yourself enjoy it instead of waiting for disaster to strike." Sarah hugged her mother, drawing strength from the embrace. When they pulled apart, Margaret was smiling more genuinely than she had in months. Now, help me figure out how to make these apples last. I am thinking we could make a pie for Sunday when your young man comes to visit. Lord knows we have not had anything sweet in this house for far too long." The days until Sunday crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sarah threw herself into her work, taking in extra mending and doing laundry for the widow Henderson who lived a mile down the road. Every spare moment went to preparing the house for Nate's visit, sweeping the floors until they shone, washing the windows to let in more light, even picking wildflowers to put in a cracked vase on the table. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was building this up into something far grander than it was, but she could not seem to help herself. Her brothers caught her excitement like a fever, pestering her constantly with questions about when Nate would arrive, what they should talk about, whether they should show him their fishing spot down by the creek, even though the creek had been dry for months. Even Margaret seemed more animated, humming old songs as she worked and taking extra care with her appearance in a way she had not since her husband's death. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made the harsh Arizona landscape look almost beautiful. Sarah dressed in her second-best dress, the blue calico that brought out her eyes, and spent far too long trying to tame her hair into something presentable. She was putting the finishing touches on the apple pie, her mother's recipe adapted for their meager supplies, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Sarah rushed to the window, her heart in her throat, and felt it stutter when she saw not just Nate but a wagon pulling up to the house. Nate sat in the driver's seat, looking freshly washed and wearing a shirt she had not seen before, and the wagon bed behind him was filled with supplies. Sacks of flour and beans, salt pork wrapped in paper, a tin of coffee, even some sugar and a bottle of molasses. Sarah ran outside, her brothers at her heels, arriving at the wagon just as Nate was climbing down. "What is all this?" she demanded, gesturing at the supplies. "Nate, this is too much. We cannot accept this." "It is not charity," Nate said quickly. "Or at least not exactly. I spoke to Mr. O'Brien about your family's situation, about your father and the drought and how hard things have been. He remembers your father kindly and wanted to help. This is surplus from the ranch stores, things we have extra of, and he had a proposition for you if you are interested." Sarah felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sight of so much food, by the kindness of people she barely knew. "What kind of proposition?" "The O'Brien household needs help," Nate explained. "Mrs. O'Brien has been managing on her own with just old Rosa, but Rosa's arthritis is getting worse and Mrs. O'Brien is not as young as she used to be. They need someone to help with the cooking and cleaning, especially now that they have hands staying in the bunkhouse who need feeding. The work would be 3 days a week to start, maybe more if it goes well. The pay is not great, but it is honest work and it comes with meals, which means you could bring food home to your family. What do you think?" Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. A real job, one that paid and fed her, was more than she had dared to hope for. "I think I need to make sure this is really happening and not some dream I am about to wake up from." Nate laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "It is really happening. Mr. O'Brien would like you to start this Wednesday if that works for you. And in the meantime, we should probably get these supplies inside before your brothers figure out there is sugar in that wagon and stage a raid." It took all of them working together to carry everything inside, and by the time they were done, the small Mitchell house looked more abundantly stocked than it had in over a year. Margaret stood in the middle of it all, tears streaming down her face, murmuring prayers of thanks. The boys danced around like wild things, high on excitement and the promise of full bellies. Nate watched it all with quiet satisfaction, and when his eyes met Sarah's across the chaos, she saw genuine happiness there. He had done this not for recognition or reward, but simply because he could, because he had the power to make a difference in their lives and he had chosen to use it. When things calmed down and Margaret insisted on serving the apple pie with precious coffee made from the supplies Nate had brought, Sarah found herself sitting next to the cowboy on the porch while her brothers played in the yard. The pie was good, maybe the best thing Sarah had tasted in months, and the coffee was rich and strong and perfect. "I do not know how to thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for all of this, for changing everything." Nate set down his coffee cup and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You do not need to thank me, but I do need you to understand something, Sarah. I did not arrange this job to impress you or to make you feel obligated to me. I did it because your family needed help and it was within my power to provide it. What is happening between us, this connection we have, it exists completely separately from the job or the supplies or any of that. I need you to believe that." "I do believe it," Sarah replied, and she realized it was true. She could see the sincerity in Nate's eyes, could feel it in the way he had treated her family with respect and dignity rather than condescension. "But I also need you to understand that I am grateful, Nate. Not just for the material help, though that means more than you can know, but for how you have made me feel. For the first time since my father died, I feel like maybe everything is going to be all right. You gave me that." Nate reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a way that felt both natural and thrilling. "Things are going to be more than all right, Sarah. I promise you that. We are going to make sure of it together." They sat like that for a long time, hand in hand on the porch, watching James and Thomas play and talking about everything and nothing. Nate told her more about his family back in Missouri, about the letters his mother sent filled with gentle pressure for him to find a nice girl and settle down. Sarah talked about her dreams of teaching, about the books she had read and loved, about the father she missed every single day. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nate reluctantly rose to leave. "I should head back before full dark. But I will see you Wednesday when you come to start work, and I was hoping maybe you would allow me to drive you home after your first day. We could talk more, and I could make sure you get back safely." "I would like that," Sarah agreed, walking him to the wagon. "Very much." This time when Nate took her hand, he held it a moment longer, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gentle caress. "I am glad I found you in that orchard, Sarah Mitchell. Even if the circumstances were not ideal, I cannot bring myself to regret a single moment of that night." "Neither can I," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She watched him drive away, the wagon kicking up small clouds of dust, and stood there until he disappeared from view. When she turned back to the house, she found her entire family watching from the windows, matching grins on their faces. The teasing that followed was relentless but good-natured, and for the first time in longer than Sarah could remember, the Mitchell house was filled with laughter and hope. That night, they ate a proper meal of salt pork and beans and fresh bread made with the flour Nate had brought, and Sarah went to bed with her stomach full and her heart fuller. Wednesday morning arrived with a mix of excitement and nerves. Sarah dressed carefully in her best dress, the green one with the white collar that her mother had painstakingly repaired until it looked almost new. Margaret braided her daughter's hair with gentle hands, securing it with a ribbon that had been saved for special occasions, and sent her off with whispered encouragement and a fierce hug. The walk to the O'Brien ranch felt shorter than it had that first desperate night, and in the morning light, Sarah could appreciate the beauty of the property. The main house was substantial, 2 stories painted white with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Gardens surrounded it, filled with vegetables and herbs and even some flowers, a testament to Mrs. O'Brien's determination to bring civilization to the desert. Sarah knocked on the back door, as was proper for someone coming to work, and was greeted by a woman who could only be Rosa. She was short and round, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and dark eyes that seemed to see everything. She looked Sarah up and down critically, then nodded once. "You are the Mitchell girl," Rosa said, her voice carrying the slight accent of her native Spanish. Come in, Mrs." O'Brien is waiting in the parlor. Wipe your feet first. The kitchen was enormous compared to what Sarah was used to, with a huge cast iron stove, multiple work tables, and more pots and pans than Sarah had ever seen in one place. Rosa led her through to the parlor, which was decorated in the latest fashion with proper furniture and curtains, and even a piano in one corner. Mrs. O'Brien rose as Sarah entered, and Sarah immediately understood why Nate spoke of the woman with such respect. She was probably in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had faced down hardship and emerged victorious. Her eyes were kind but shrewd, and she sized Sarah up with the same efficiency that Rosa had displayed. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming. Please sit down." "Would you like some tea?" Sarah perched nervously on the edge of a chair that was far nicer than anything in her own home. "No thank you, Mrs. O'Brien, that is very kind. Nate has told me about your family's situation," Mrs. O'Brien said, getting straight to the point. "And my husband remembers your father from before his death. I understand you have been managing the household on your own since then." "Yes, ma'am. My mother has not been well and my brothers are still young. I do whatever I can to keep us going," Mrs. O'Brien nodded approvingly. "That speaks well of your character. I will be direct with you, Miss Mitchell. I need help and you need work. But I need to know that you are reliable, that you will show up when you are supposed to and give me honest labor for honest pay. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied firmly. "I can and I will. I'm not afraid of hard work and I am grateful for the opportunity." "Good. Then let me explain what I need. You will work 3 full days a week to start, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Your duties will include helping Rosa in the kitchen, doing laundry, cleaning the main house, and occasionally serving when we have guests. The work is hard but fair. You will be paid $3 a week, and you may take home leftovers from the kitchen at the end of each day. Additionally, you will receive lunch while you are here. Does that sound acceptable? $3 a week was more than Sarah had dared to hope for. With careful management, that plus the food would mean her family could not just survive but actually begin to recover. "More than acceptable, Mrs. O'Brien, thank you. Do not thank me yet," Mrs. O'Brien said with a slight smile. "Wait until you see how much work $3 buys. Rosa, will you show Miss Mitchell where things are and what needs to be done today?" The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Rosa was a tough taskmaster, but a fair one, showing Sarah exactly how things needed to be done and accepting nothing less than perfection. They started with the breakfast dishes, which seemed to multiply impossibly given that there were only 4 people in the household, then moved on to sweeping and mopping the kitchen and dining room. After that came laundry, hauling water and heating it over the stove, scrubbing shirts and sheets and tablecloths until Sarah's hands were red and raw. But it was good work, honest work, and Sarah threw herself into it with determination. Rosa watched her carefully at first, clearly waiting for Sarah to complain or falter, but when Sarah just kept working without a word of protest, the older woman's demeanor softened slightly. "You work hard," Rosa commented as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. "That is good, Mrs. O'Brien does not tolerate lazy. My mother taught me that hard work is its own reward," Sarah replied, pinning up a sheet with practiced efficiency. "And I am grateful to be here, Rosa. This job means everything to my family." Rosa nodded sagely. "That Nate, he is a good boy. He tells Mrs. O'Brien about your situation, about your father dying and your family struggling. He worries about you. That is unusual for a young man to think about someone else before himself." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Nate has been very kind to us." "Kind," Rosa repeated with a knowing look. "Yes, kind, and handsome too, no, and single, very single." "Rosa, I am here to work," Sarah protested, but she could not quite hide her smile. Of course. Work first. But a little romance makes the work go faster, I think. You are a good girl, Sarah Mitchell. You deserve some happiness." When lunchtime came, Rosa set out a spread that made Sarah's eyes widen. Fresh bread, cold roast beef, pickled vegetables, and apple cake for dessert. Sarah ate in the kitchen with Rosa, and the food was so good she had to fight the urge to eat too quickly and make herself sick. Rosa watched her with satisfaction, clearly pleased to see her cooking appreciated. The afternoon brought more work, cleaning the upstairs bedrooms, dusting the parlor, helping Rosa prepare ingredients for the evening meal. By the time the sun began to sink low, Sarah was exhausted but satisfied. She had proven herself capable, and both Rosa and Mrs. O'Brien seemed pleased with her efforts. Mrs. O'Brien came into the kitchen as Sarah was finishing up, carrying an envelope. "Miss Mitchell, here is an advance on your first week's wages. You have done excellent work today, and I look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Rosa has packed some leftovers for you to take home." Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands, hardly daring to believe that she had actually earned money, real money, for her labor. "Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. I will be here bright and early on Friday." She was gathering her things when there was a knock at the back door and then Nate's voice calling out, "Is it safe to come in, or are you ladies plotting something dangerous?" Rosa laughed and waved him in. "Come, come, your Sarah is ready to go home." "She is not my Sarah," Nate protested, but his eyes found hers immediately and the warmth in them contradicted his words. "But I did promise to make sure she got home safely. Are you ready, Miss Mitchell?" Sarah nodded, suddenly shy. She had been working so hard all day that she had barely thought about Nate, but now the reality of spending time alone with him hit her with full force. Rosa pressed a basket into her hands, heavy with food, and whispered, "Enjoy the ride home, Querida. Take your time." Nate had brought a small buggy rather than the wagon, which meant they would be sitting close together on the single bench seat. He helped Sarah up with courtly manners, making sure she was settled before climbing up himself and taking the reins. As they pulled away from the ranch house, Sarah was acutely aware of every place their bodies touched, his shoulder against hers, his thigh pressing close in the confined space. "How was your first day?" Nate asked as they turned onto the main road. "Did Rosa work you too hard?" "It was wonderful," Sarah replied honestly. "Hard work, but good work. Rosa is exacting but fair, and Mrs. O'Brien seems pleased. I cannot believe I am being paid to do things I would do anyway at home. It feels almost too good to be true." "You earned every cent," Nate assured her. "Mrs. O'Brien told me at lunch that she was impressed with your work ethic and attention to detail. She said you might be the answer to her prayers, which is high praise from a woman who does not give compliments lightly." They fell into easy conversation, and Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. Nate told her about his day working with a new horse, a spirited gelding that had been giving the other hands trouble but seemed to respond well to patient handling. Sarah described Rosa's cooking and Mrs. O'Brien's parlor with its piano and proper curtains, painting pictures with her words that made Nate laugh. As they approached the Mitchell homestead, Nate slowed the buggy, as if reluctant for the journey to end. "Sarah, I was wondering if you might like to go on a proper outing with me. There is a church social next Saturday evening with music and dancing and a potluck supper. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Sarah's heart soared, but reality quickly brought it back down to earth. "I would love to, but I do not have anything appropriate to wear to a social. My dresses are all patched and worn, and I do not want to embarrass you." "You could never embarrass me," Nate said firmly. "Sarah, you are beautiful and smart and strong. No one is going to care about your dress, and anyone who does is not worth worrying about. But if it would make you feel more comfortable, I know my mother sent me some fabric in her last package, intended for my sisters, but they have more than enough. Perhaps your mother could make something for you." "Nate, I cannot keep taking things from you," Sarah protested. "You have already done so much." He pulled the buggy to a stop and turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Sarah, listen to me. I care about you. Not because I pity you or because I want you to feel obligated to me, but because when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary. Someone brave and selfless who faces impossible odds with grace and determination. Someone who makes me want to be a better man. If I want to give you things or help your family, it is because doing so makes me happy. Can you understand that? Sarah looked into his eyes, those clear blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, and felt something shift inside her. She had been so focused on survival, on just making it through each day, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen as a person rather than just a collection of problems and responsibilities. Nate saw her, really saw her, and the realization was overwhelming. "I can understand that," she whispered. "And Nate, I care about you too, more than I probably should given how recently we met. You have brought light back into my life at a time when I thought everything was darkness. So yes, I would love to go to the social with you, and yes, I will accept the fabric with gratitude." Nate's smile was brilliant. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing kisses to each of her knuckles in a gesture that sent shivers down her spine. "You have made me very happy, Sarah Mitchell. I will bring the fabric by tomorrow if that works for you." "That would be perfect," Sarah agreed. When they reached the house, James and Thomas came running out, full of questions about Sarah's first day and barely contained excitement at seeing Nate again. He greeted them warmly, listening to their chatter with genuine interest, and even agreeing to stay for supper when Margaret came out and insisted. The meal was simple but plentiful thanks to the supplies from the ranch, and the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people who are at ease with one another. As Nate was finally leaving with promises to return the next day with the fabric, Sarah walked him out to the buggy. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in their thousands, and the desert air carried the scent of sage and dust. "Thank you for today," Sarah said quietly. "For the ride home, for staying for supper, for being so good with my brothers. You make everything better just by being there." Nate reached up and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Sarah, may I kiss you?" The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. She knew she should probably say no, should maintain some semblance of propriety, but she found herself nodding. "Yes." Nate leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Sarah stayed perfectly still, her eyes drifting closed as his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle and sweet, a soft press of lips that lasted only a moment but seemed to contain entire worlds. When they pulled apart, Sarah felt breathless and dizzy and more alive than she had in months. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you in the orchard," Nate admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "You are something special, Sarah Mitchell. I hope you know that." Sarah could not find words, so she just smiled up at him, hoping her expression conveyed everything she was feeling. Nate climbed into the buggy with obvious reluctance, and Sarah watched until he disappeared from sight, her fingers pressed to her lips where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. The next weeks fell into a pattern that was both exhausting and wonderful. Sarah worked at the O'Brien Ranch 3 days a week, throwing herself into her duties with determination and slowly winning Rosa's complete approval and Mrs. O'Brien's trust. The pay and food made an enormous difference to the Mitchell family. The boys began to fill out, their faces losing that pinched, hungry look. Margaret's health improved as her nutrition improved, and she began taking more interest in the household again, even starting work on a new dress for Sarah using the beautiful blue fabric Nate had brought. And Nate was there, woven through Sarah's days like a golden thread. He drove her home after each workday, and those drives became the highlight of Sarah's week. They talked about everything: their dreams for the future, their fears, their beliefs about God and politics and what made a good life. Sometimes they disagreed, and Sarah found she loved that almost as much as the agreement, loved the way Nate listened to her opinions with respect and engaged with her ideas as equals. The Saturday of the church social arrived with perfect weather, cool and clear with just a hint of autumn chill in the evening air. Sarah's new dress was finished, and when she put it on, she barely recognized herself. The blue fabric brought out her eyes and the color in her cheeks, and Margaret had styled her hair in a more sophisticated arrangement that made Sarah feel almost elegant. When Nate arrived to collect her, his reaction made all the effort worthwhile. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, and simply stared for a long moment before managing to speak. "Sarah, you look absolutely beautiful. I am going to be the envy of every man at that social." The church social was held in the town square, with lanterns strung between the buildings and tables laden with food contributed by families from all over the area. There was a small band playing fiddle music, and couples were already dancing in the cleared space that served as a makeshift dance floor. Sarah felt a moment of anxiety as they arrived, conscious of the curious looks they were receiving, but Nate kept a steady hand at the small of her back, anchoring her. Several people came up to greet them, and Nate introduced Sarah with obvious pride. She recognized some faces from church, though she had kept so much to herself since her father's death that she barely knew anyone anymore. But people were kind, welcoming her and asking after her mother and brothers with genuine concern. When the band struck up a waltz, Nate turned to her with a formal bow. "Miss Mitchell, would you do me the honor of this dance?" "I should warn you that I am not a very good dancer," Sarah said nervously. "My father tried to teach me once, but I spent most of the time stepping on his feet." "Then we will be perfectly matched because I am about to step on yours," Nate replied with a grin. "Come on, it will be fun." He swept her onto the dance floor before she could protest further, and to Sarah's surprise, they did not do too badly. Nate was a competent dancer, confident enough to lead clearly, and Sarah found herself following his cues more easily than she had expected. They whirled around the makeshift floor, and Sarah felt something she had not experienced in so long: pure, uncomplicated joy. They danced several more dances, then took a break to sample the food and talk with other guests. Sarah found herself chatting with Mrs. Henderson, for whom she did occasional laundry, and with the pastor's wife, who immediately invited Sarah to join the church ladies' group. It felt good to be part of the community again, to be seen as a person with value beyond her problems. As the evening wore on, Nate led Sarah away from the crowds, toward a quiet spot at the edge of the square where they could still hear the music but have some privacy. They sat on a bench beneath one of the lanterns, and Nate took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Are you having a good time?" he asked. "The best time," Sarah replied honestly. "I had forgotten what it feels like to just enjoy myself, to not be worried about the next crisis or where the next meal is coming from. Thank you for bringing me tonight." "Sarah, there is something I need to tell you," Nate said, and his tone was serious enough that Sarah felt a flutter of worry. "I have been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want my life to look like, and every time I try to picture it, you are there. You and your smile and your strength and your kindness. I know we have not been courting very long, but I also know that what I feel for you is real and true, and unlike anything I have experienced before." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the sound of it. "Nate, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Sarah Mitchell. I am saying that I want a future with you if you will have me. I am not proposing, not yet, because I want to do this properly and I want to give you time to be sure of your feelings. But I wanted you to know where my heart stands, wanted you to know that this is not just a casual courtship for me. You are it, Sarah. You are who I want." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and overwhelming emotion. "Oh, Nate, I am falling in love with you too. I think I started falling that very first night when you showed me such kindness instead of judgment. You have changed everything for me, and not just because of the material help, though that has been more than I could have dreamed. You have changed how I see myself, how I see the world. You have given me hope again." Nate cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Then we are in agreement. We will take our time, do this right, but we will do it together. I promise you, Sarah, I am going to spend every day working to be worthy of you." "You are already worthy," Sarah whispered. "More than worthy." This time when Nate kissed her, it was deeper, more passionate, a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. Sarah melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and for that perfect moment, nothing else in the world existed except the two of them and the love growing between them. They returned to the social hand in hand, and if anyone noticed that Sarah's cheeks were flushed and Nate could not stop smiling, no one commented. They danced until the band packed up and the lanterns were extinguished, and then Nate drove Sarah home through the moonlit desert, both of them giddy with happiness and the weight of confessions made. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Sarah's life. She continued working at the O'Brien Ranch, and as her confidence grew, so did her responsibilities. Mrs. O'Brien began teaching her more complex cooking techniques, and even started discussing books with her, lending Sarah volumes from the ranch's extensive library. Rosa became not just a coworker but a friend, someone who dispensed wisdom and wry humor in equal measures. The Mitchell family continued to recover. With steady income and food, Margaret's health improved dramatically, and she began talking about perhaps taking in some sewing work herself. James and Thomas thrived, growing like weeds and getting into the kinds of mischief healthy, well-fed boys were prone to. The homestead began to look less desperate, with repairs made to the roof and porch, with the garden plot cleared and prepared for spring planting. And through it all, Nate was a constant presence, a steady force of love and support. He came for dinner every Sunday without fail, often bringing small gifts. Books he thought Sarah would enjoy, penny candy for the boys, seeds for the garden, a beautiful shawl for Margaret. He helped James and Thomas with their lessons, teaching them things about horses and ranching and what it meant to be a good man. He fixed things around the homestead without being asked, never making a show of it, but simply doing what needed to be done. Christmas came and Nate gave Sarah a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said. "And maybe someday, for the lessons you will teach. I know you still dream of being a teacher, Sarah, and I want you to know that I will support that dream in every way I can." Sarah gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, working on it in secret for weeks, embroidering his initials on the cuff with painstaking care. When he saw it, his eyes grew bright with emotion. "I will treasure this always," he promised. Winter in Arizona was mild compared to the Missouri winters Nate remembered, but there were still cold nights when frost painted the desert white and the wind carried a bitter edge. On one such night in late January, Nate came to dinner with a nervous energy that Sarah noticed immediately. He barely ate, pushing food around his plate, and kept glancing at her with an expression she could not quite read. After the meal was finished and the boys had been sent to bed, Nate asked if he could speak with Margaret privately. Sarah's mother agreed, curiosity evident in her expression, and they disappeared into the small back room that served as Margaret's bedroom. They were gone for nearly 20 minutes, and Sarah paced the main room anxiously, trying to imagine what they could be discussing. When they emerged, Margaret was smiling and crying at the same time, and Nate looked both relieved and terrified. He came straight to Sarah, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, will you walk outside with me for a moment? There is something I need to ask you." Sarah's heart was racing as she followed him out onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing in the infinite sky, and she could see her breath misting in the air. Nate led her down the steps and into the yard, toward a spot where they could see the whole sweep of the desert stretching out under the moonlight. "Sarah Mitchell," Nate began, and his voice was shaking slightly. "6 months ago, I met a young woman in an apple orchard. She was trying to feed her family the only way she knew how, and she looked at me with such fear and pride and desperate hope that it broke my heart. I helped her that night because it was the right thing to do, but I never expected that she would end up helping me far more than I helped her." He paused, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small box. Sarah's breath caught as he dropped to one knee in the dust, looking up at her with those clear blue eyes that had captured her from the start. "You have taught me what real strength looks like," Nate continued. What courage and selflessness and grace mean. You have shown me a future I want to build, a life I want to live. I spoke with your mother and I have asked for her blessing, which she has given. Now I am asking you, Sarah Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me? Will you be my wife? He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire set in the center. It was my grandmother's, Nate explained. My mother sent it to me when I wrote to tell her about you. She said any woman who could capture my heart so completely deserved to wear it. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming freely down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, she managed to choke out. Yes, Nate, I will marry you. I love you so much, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Nate surged to his feet, scooping her up and spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise, and Sarah kissed him back with all the love in her heart. When they finally made it back inside, Margaret was waiting with a bottle of dandelion wine she had been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted to the future. The boys, woken by the commotion, came stumbling out of their room rubbing sleepy eyes, and when they learned that Nate was going to be their brother, they cheered loud enough to wake the neighbors. The engagement period was both wonderful and challenging. Sarah and Nate decided to wait until spring to marry, partly to give themselves time to prepare and partly because Nate was saving money to buy a piece of land where they could build a home of their own. Mr. O'Brien, when he heard of the engagement, offered to sell Nate a parcel of ranch land at a very fair price, and Nate accepted gratefully. Sarah continued working at the ranch, and Mrs. O'Brien began teaching her even more skills: proper service for fancy dinners, flower arranging, the social graces that would serve Sarah well as a rancher's wife. Rosa gave her recipes and cooking lessons, making sure Sarah knew how to feed a working man and stretch supplies when times got tough. The community rallied around the upcoming wedding with enthusiasm. The church ladies organized a quilting bee to make Sarah and Nate a wedding quilt, and each square was stitched with love and good wishes. The men from the ranch, Nate's friends and co-workers, began helping him build a small house on his new land, working in their spare time to raise walls and put on a roof. Sarah visited the building site as often as she could, marveling at how quickly the house took shape. It was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a parlor, and Nate had designed it with Sarah's input, making sure there was space for a large garden and a chicken coop, and maybe someday a barn for horses. We will grow into it, Nate said, standing with his arm around Sarah's waist as they surveyed the progress. This is just the start. Someday we will have children running through these rooms and we will add on as we need to, but for now it is ours and it is enough. Sarah leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and full of hope. It is more than enough, it is perfect. As spring approached, the wedding preparations intensified. Margaret made Sarah a wedding dress from beautiful white fabric that Nate's mother had sent from Missouri, along with a letter welcoming Sarah to the family and expressing regret that the distance made attending the wedding impossible. The dress was simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and when Sarah tried it on for the final fitting, she felt like a princess. The night before the wedding, Sarah lay awake in the bed she had slept in all her life, listening to her mother's quiet breathing from the other room. So much had changed since that desperate night in the orchard. Her family was healthy and stable. She had a job she enjoyed and friends she valued. And tomorrow, she would marry the man she loved more than she had known it was possible to love anyone. She thought about her father, wished he could be there to walk her down the aisle, but she felt his presence nonetheless. He would have approved of Nate, she was certain. Would have seen in him the same qualities of kindness and strength and integrity that had defined Dan Mitchell's own life. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect spring mornings when the desert came alive with color. Wildflowers bloomed everywhere, painting the landscape in shades of yellow and purple and red, and the air was sweet with the scent of sage and growing things. The ceremony was held at the church, which was packed with friends and neighbors and well-wishers. Sarah walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, Margaret crying happy tears as she delivered her daughter to her future. Nate stood at the altar looking more handsome than Sarah had ever seen him, wearing a new suit and looking at her like she was the only person in the world. The pastor spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, and Sarah barely heard the words. She was too focused on Nate, on the way he held her hands and looked into her eyes, on the promises they were making to each other. When it came time for the vows, Nate's voice was strong and clear. I, Nathaniel Brennan, take you, Sarah Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you and cherish you, to support your dreams and hold you through your fears, to be your partner in all things from this day forward. You saved my life the night I found you in that orchard, though you do not know it. You gave me purpose and direction and a future worth fighting for. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she replied, I, Sarah Mitchell, take you, Nathaniel Brennan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you and honor you, to stand beside you through whatever life brings, to be your home and your harbor. You showed me kindness when I needed it most, and you have given me more joy than I ever thought possible. I love you with all my heart, and I will for the rest of my life. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Nate he could kiss his bride, the whole church erupted in cheers. Nate gathered Sarah into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring who was watching, and Sarah kissed him back with equal enthusiasm. They were married, truly married, and nothing had ever felt so right. The reception was held at the O'Brien Ranch, with tables set up outside and more food than Sarah had ever seen in one place. There was music and dancing and toasts, with seemingly everyone wanting to share their well wishes and advice. Mr. O'Brien gave a touching speech about young love and new beginnings, and Rosa hugged Sarah so hard she could barely breathe, whispering in Spanish that she was so proud and so happy. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Nate and Sarah slipped away from the celebration. They drove to their new house, their home, and Nate carried Sarah over the threshold in the traditional manner, both of them laughing with pure happiness. The house was small and still smelled of fresh wood and paint, but it was theirs. Friends had furnished it with donated and handmade items, a bed frame and dresser, a kitchen table and chairs, quilts and curtains and dishes. There were even flowers in a vase on the table, a welcoming touch from Mrs. O'Brien. Nate set Sarah down gently in the middle of their parlor, and for a moment they just stood there, taking it all in. Then Nate pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Hello, Mrs. Brennan," he said softly. "Welcome home." "Hello, Mr. Brennan," Sarah replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love the way that sounds." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of gentle discovery and whispered promises. Nate was patient and loving, making sure Sarah felt safe and cherished, and Sarah marveled at the intimacy of it, at the way their bodies fit together as perfectly as their hearts did. They fell asleep tangled together in their marriage bed, exhausted and happy and complete. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Sarah had to learn to manage her own household while still working part-time at the O'Brien Ranch, which Mrs. O'Brien had insisted she continue doing since Sarah was so valuable and enjoyed the work. Nate worked long days at the ranch, but he always came home to Sarah, and the evenings they spent together became precious rituals. They would eat dinner together, sharing the details of their days, then sit on their small porch watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant colors. Sometimes they would read aloud to each other, Nate's deep voice bringing stories to life. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, holding hands and counting stars. And sometimes they would go to bed early, eager to explore the physical side of their marriage, learning each other's bodies and desires with increasing confidence and joy. Sarah's family remained close, with Margaret and the boys coming for Sunday dinners every week without fail. Thomas and James adored having Nate as a brother, following him around like puppies and hanging on his every word. Margaret bloomed in her recovery, taking on sewing work and becoming more like her old self every day. As summer approached, Sarah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to say anything to Nate, wanting to be certain, but when 2 months passed without her monthly courses, she knew. She was carrying Nate's child, and the realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told him on a Sunday evening after her family had gone home. They were sitting on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, and Sarah took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Nate, there is something I need to tell you. I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Nate just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the most brilliant smile Sarah had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of pure joy that probably scared every animal within a mile. He scooped her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Sarah, we are going to be parents. This is the best news, the most incredible news. I love you so much. Thank you for this gift." "I am scared," Sarah admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother? What if—" Nate silenced her with a kiss. "You are going to be an amazing mother. Look at how you took care of your brothers and your mother through the worst of times. Look at your strength and your compassion and your love. Our child is so lucky to have you. And Sarah, nothing is going to go wrong. I am going to take such good care of both of you, I promise." The pregnancy was mostly easy, with Sarah suffering only mild morning sickness in the first few months. She continued working at the ranch until she was about 6 months along, at which point Mrs. O'Brien gently insisted she stay home and rest. "You have done enough, dear girl," Mrs. O'Brien said kindly. "Now you need to focus on taking care of yourself and that baby. Do not worry about the job. It will be here waiting for you when you are ready to come back if you want it." Nate became almost comically protective, fussing over Sarah constantly and refusing to let her do anything he deemed too strenuous. Sarah found it both touching and occasionally annoying, but she loved him for it, loved knowing that he cared so deeply for her and their unborn child. On a cold February morning in 1885, nearly 2 years after that fateful night in the apple orchard, Sarah went into labor. Nate rode like the wind to fetch the midwife while Margaret stayed with Sarah, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night, and there were moments when Sarah was certain she could not endure another second. But Margaret was there, strong and steady, and when Nate returned with the midwife, his presence gave Sarah new strength. He held her hand through the worst of it, whispering words of love and encouragement, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting outside. Finally, as the sun was rising on a new day, Sarah gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of terrifying silence and then the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's lusty cry. The midwife held up a squirming, red-faced infant and Sarah's heart simply stopped. "It is a boy," the midwife announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy with good lungs, as you can hear." She placed the baby on Sarah's chest, and Sarah stared down at this tiny person, this miracle, with overwhelming love. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and Nate's clear blue eyes and the most adorable tiny fingers Sarah had ever seen. Nate was crying unashamedly, touching the baby's head with infinite gentleness, his expression one of pure awe. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered. "Welcome to the world. We are your parents and we love you so much already." They named him Daniel Nathaniel Brennan, after both their fathers, and called him Danny. He was a good baby, healthy and alert, and from the first moment, he had both Sarah and Nate wrapped completely around his tiny fingers. Nate was an involved father, helping with night feedings and diaper changes without complaint, walking the floor with Danny when he fussed, singing him lullabies in his deep voice that usually put the baby right to sleep. The boys, now 12 and 10, were fascinated by their nephew, coming over constantly to hold him and play with him. Margaret was a doting grandmother, making clothes for Danny and insisting on helping Sarah whenever she looked tired. The whole family had fallen in love with this new little person. As Danny grew from infant to toddler, Sarah and Nate's love continued to deepen. They had weathered the challenges of new parenthood together, learning to work as a team to communicate about needs and fears and hopes. Their physical relationship, which had paused during the late stages of pregnancy and early weeks after birth, resumed with new depths of intimacy and connection. When Danny was about 18 months old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less shocking, though no less joyous. They welcomed a second son, whom they named William after Nate's father, in the fall of 1886. Little Will was different from his brother, quieter and more contemplative, with Sarah's brown eyes and a thoughtful expression that made him seem wise beyond his infant years. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Nate had been promoted to foreman at the O'Brien Ranch, which came with better pay and more responsibility. Sarah divided her time between their home and occasional work at the ranch when Mrs. O'Brien needed extra help for parties or special occasions. The garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables for the table and extras to sell or trade. They got chickens and a milk cow, slowly building the small homestead into something prosperous and sustainable. Sarah's teaching dreams had not died, and when Danny turned 4, she began teaching him his letters and numbers using the methods her mother had taught her. Other parents in the area, seeing how well Danny was learning, began asking if Sarah might teach their children as well. Before she knew it, Sarah was running an informal school from her home 3 mornings a week, teaching 6 children ranging in age from 4 to 8. She loved it. Loved seeing the light dawn in a child's eyes when they mastered a new concept. Loved fostering curiosity and learning. The parents paid what they could, some in money and some in trade, but Sarah would have done it for free. This was what she had always dreamed of, and now she was living it. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nate took Sarah back to the O'Brien orchard where they had first met. It was autumn again, and the trees were heavy with apples just as they had been that night. They walked through the rows hand in hand, and Nate pulled her to a stop beneath the very tree where he had first found her. "You remember this tree?" he asked. "Of course," Sarah replied. "How could I forget? This is where my life changed." Nate reached up and picked an apple, holding it out to her with a smile. "5 years ago, you were stealing apples to feed your starving family. I filled a basket and walked you home. It was the best decision I ever made. Sarah, these past 5 years with you have been the happiest of my life. You have given me a home and a family and a purpose. You have made me a better man. And I want to spend the next 50 years, the next 100 years, continuing to build this life with you." Sarah took the apple, tears streaming down her face. "Nate Brennan, I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I loved you desperately then. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You saw me at my lowest and loved me anyway. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more. I cannot imagine a single day without you." They kissed beneath the apple tree just as the sun was setting, and Sarah felt like their story had come full circle. From desperation and theft to love and prosperity, from hunger and fear to fullness and security, they had traveled such a long road together. And the journey was far from over. Over the next several years, their family continued to grow. Sarah gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Alina, when Danny was 6 and Will was 4. The girls were a delightful handful, identical in appearance but completely different in personality. Emma was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief, while Alina was gentler and more artistic, happiest with a pencil and paper creating elaborate drawings. The little house had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Nate built on 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The homestead prospered, with Nate raising horses on the side in addition to his work at the O'Brien Ranch. Sarah's informal school had grown to 15 students, and there was talk in the community of building an actual schoolhouse and hiring Sarah as the official teacher. Margaret lived to see all her grandchildren, doting on them with the energy she had lacked when grief consumed her. She passed peacefully in her sleep when Danny was 8, having found joy again in her final years and having seen her daughter happily settled. Sarah mourned her deeply, but took comfort in knowing that her mother had been happy at the end, surrounded by love and family. James and Thomas grew into fine young men, learning ranching from Nate and eventually getting jobs at the O'Brien Ranch themselves. They both married local girls and started families of their own, staying close to Sarah and making sure their children knew their Aunt Sarah, who had sacrificed so much for them when they were young. As the children grew, Sarah and Nate made sure to nurture not just their bodies but their minds and spirits. They read to them every night, taught them about kindness and integrity, showed them through example what a loving marriage looked like. They took them on picnics in the desert and taught them to appreciate the harsh beauty of their home. They made sure they knew the story of how their parents met, turning that desperate night in the orchard into a family legend about love and providence and second chances. Danny grew into a serious, hard-working boy who loved horses as much as his father did. He would sit for hours watching Nate train the young colts, absorbing every lesson and technique. Will was quieter and loved books, devouring everything he could get his hands on and showing an aptitude for numbers that suggested he might become a businessman or banker. The twins were inseparable, getting into adventures that gave Sarah gray hairs but also made her laugh with their cleverness and creativity. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nate surprised Sarah with a trip to Tucson, leaving the children in the capable hands of Rosa and various family members. It was the first time they had been truly alone together since before Danny was born, and they reveled in it. They stayed in a real hotel, ate at restaurants, attended a theater performance. And they reconnected as a couple, not just as parents, remembering the passion and romance that had brought them together. "I love our children more than life itself," Sarah said one evening as they sat in the hotel restaurant. "But I had forgotten what it was like to just be us, you and me." "Thank you for this, Nate. We needed this," Nate agreed. "As much as I adore our chaotic, beautiful life, it is good to remember that we were a love story before we were a family story, and we are still a love story, Sarah. That has not changed." They returned home refreshed and recommitted to making time for their marriage amid the demands of parenthood. They instituted a weekly tradition of sitting on their porch after the children were in bed, talking and holding hands, and simply being together. It was a small thing, but it kept them connected through the years and challenges. As the century drew to a close, Sarah and Nate found themselves surrounded by blessings. Their children were healthy and thriving. Their homestead was prosperous. They had deep roots in the community and the respect of their neighbors. And they still looked at each other with the same love and wonder that had bloomed in an apple orchard so many years before. One evening, when Sarah was 42 and Nate was 46, they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Their children were grown or nearly so. Danny was 22 and working as head wrangler at the O'Brien Ranch, engaged to a sweet girl from town. Will was 20 and away at university studying business, the first person in either family to pursue higher education. The twins were 16, still living at home but beginning to chafe at the boundaries of childhood, eager to step into their own futures. "You ever think about that night?" Sarah asked quietly. "The night we met, all the time," Nate replied. "I think about how different our lives would be if I had not decided to take that walk through the orchard, if I had been harder on you, or if you had run away before I could help. Every good thing in my life stems from that one moment. I was so scared," Sarah remembered. so desperate and ashamed and certain that I was going to lose everything. And then you appeared, and instead of condemning me, you showed me kindness. You changed the trajectory of my entire life." Nate pulled her close, and Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke and home. "We changed each other," he said. "That is what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves. You made me into the man I always wanted to be, Sarah. You gave me purpose and direction and a reason to work hard and dream big." "You gave me everything," Sarah replied simply. "Hope when I had none, love when I thought I was unlovable. A family and a home and a life beyond anything I dared to imagine. Every day with you has been a gift, Nate Brennan." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The desert spread out around them, vast and beautiful and unforgiving, but they had carved out a place of softness and love in its midst. Their home stood as a testament to what could be built with hard work and dedication and genuine partnership. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with any long life. They became grandparents when Danny and his wife welcomed a son, experiencing the particular delight of watching their own child navigate parenthood. Will came home from university with a degree and opened a bank in Prescott, becoming a respected businessman. Emma scandalized the family by announcing she wanted to be a doctor, and somehow made it happen, becoming one of the first female physicians in Arizona. Eleanor married a painter and moved to Santa Fe, where she opened a gallery showcasing Southwestern art. Through it all, Sarah and Nate remained each other's constant. They weathered illnesses and financial setbacks, celebrated successes and milestones, supported each other through the losses that inevitably came with aging. Their love, far from fading with time, only grew deeper and richer, aged like fine wine into something complex and precious. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge party. The whole town seemed to turn out, and speeches were made about the example Sarah and Nate had set, about their kindness and generosity, and the way they had built not just a family but a legacy. Sarah sat at Nate's side, holding his hand as she had done for 3 decades, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had built together. 30 years, she whispered to him. "Can you believe it?" "Best 30 years of my life," Nate replied, his blue eyes still as clear and warm as they had been when he was a young cowboy finding a desperate girl in an orchard. "And I look forward to 30 more, God willing." When Sarah was 55 and Nate was 59, he began having trouble with his heart. The doctor prescribed rest and limited activity, but Nate chafed at the restrictions, hating being sidelined from the physical work he loved. Sarah nursed him with tender patience, making sure he followed doctor's orders while finding ways to keep him engaged and purposeful. They spent more time on their porch, talking about the past and marveling at the family they had created. They watched their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children once played. They read together and prayed together and held each other through the fear of what might come. "Sarah," Nate said one evening, his voice serious, "if something happens to me, I need you to know that my life has been complete. You gave me everything I ever wanted and so much more. No man has ever been loved better or been happier than I have been with you." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Sarah said fiercely. "You are going to recover and we are going to grow old and gray together, watching our great-grandchildren grow up. Do you hear me, Nathaniel Brennan? You do not get to leave me yet." Nate smiled and pulled her close. "Yes, ma'am, I will do my best to stick around as long as you want me." He did recover, slowly but surely, though he was never quite as strong as he had been before. He retired from the ranch, turning over his foreman duties to Danny, and found new purpose in teaching his grandchildren about horses and ranching and what it meant to live with integrity. He and Sarah became the heart of the family, the ones everyone turned to for wisdom and perspective and unconditional love. The new century brought changes to Arizona and to Prescott. Automobiles appeared on the roads, and electricity came to town. The wild frontier that Sarah and Nate had known as young people was fading into history, replaced by something more civilized but perhaps less free. They watched the changes with interest, but remained rooted in their values and their love for each other. They grew old together in the way that truly devoted couples do, each caring for the other's weaknesses, celebrating each other's strengths. When Sarah's eyes grew weak, Nate read to her every evening. When Nate's joints ached with arthritis, Sarah would massage them with gentle hands, soothing away the pain with her touch. On a beautiful spring day in 1920, when Sarah was 65 and Nate was 69, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The homestead was celebrating its 35th year, and the apple trees they had planted decades ago were in full bloom, filling the air with sweet perfume. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, a whole new generation carrying forward the legacy of love and family that Sarah and Nate had built. "Do you remember," Sarah said softly, "what you told me that very first night? You said you came from a family that had lost everything, and you promised yourself you would help others the way you were helped." "I remember," Nate replied, his voice still strong despite his age. "You kept that promise," Sarah continued. "Not just with me and my family, but with everyone you have encountered. You have spent your whole life being kind and generous and good. You saved me, Nate, but you saved so many others too." Nate took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "And you, Sarah Mitchell Brennan, took your second chance and built something extraordinary with it. You raised 4 remarkable children. You taught hundreds of students, shaping minds and futures. You created a home that has been a haven for everyone who entered it. You turned poverty and desperation into prosperity and joy. That is your legacy." "Our legacy," Sarah corrected. "We built it together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family, counting their blessings, remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a stolen apple to a lifetime of love, from hunger and fear to abundance and security, they had traveled so far together. And every step of the way, they had held each other's hands. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. She thought about that scared 20-year-old girl climbing a fence to steal fruit, never imagining that the cowboy who caught her would become her whole world. She thought about all the moments that had led them here, the first kiss, the proposal, the wedding, the children, the countless ordinary days that had woven together into an extraordinary life. "I love you, Nate Brennan," she whispered. "Thank you for filling my basket all those years ago and walking me home. Thank you for every day since." "I love you too, Sarah," Nate replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every single moment. You are my home, you are my heart, and you always will be." They sat on their porch as the stars began to emerge, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well nurtured. The laughter of their descendants filled the air, the sweet smell of apple blossoms perfumed the breeze, and 2 souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances held tight to the love that had sustained them through decades. It was not just a happy ending. It was a happy lifetime, and every moment had been worth the journey. Their story, which had begun with an act of desperate necessity in an apple orchard, had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, compassion, and true love. And as the moon rose over their beloved homestead, Sarah and Nate Brennan knew that their greatest adventure had been each other, and they would not have traded a single moment of it for anything in the world.